Mike, go ahead and introduce yourself again if you would.
So I'm Mike Kenny, 22-year Army veteran, retired as lieutenant colonel. I was a special forces guy, infantry guy. So I retired out of the Command and General Staff College and the School of Advanced Military Studies, at Fort Leavenworth here. As an instructor, not incarcerated, mind you. Um, that's a joke, fellas. Yeah. No, but um, yeah, no, so that's my background in a nutshell. West Point grad, year group 93. And then upon retirement, assumed the helm of Warriors Ascent, which is, was at the time a fledgling nonprofit that helps veterans and first responders with post-traumatic stress. So a 501c3. So I've been doing that for 7 years. We just ran are currently running, and we'll graduate our 57th cohort this Friday. So
That's awesome. Um, so what were we kind of started out with talking benefits since we're about benefits. What were some benefits you've used so far? And it can be because obviously there's an array of them in different types. It can be any and all, maybe your favorites or ones you got the most out of, however you see fit.
now, benefits, you're talking about what, retirement or just stuff in the Army, or what's the
Any and all, so like veteran benefits, whether it's federal, so like VA loan, or it's something more like like what you do for veterans. So there's a program, helmets to hard hats, is we've interviewed them, so they're a program. So anything like that that you think you've gotten something out of that you'd like to share with
yeah,
listeners.
sure. No, so VA, went to the VA, and at Fort Leavenworth, the Dwight D. Eisenhower VA, very very good. I think I was treated well. Upon retirement, or I should say, on the glide path to retirement. Did my physical and all that stuff. So for veterans, or for people that are looking to retire or get out, have a veteran service organization like the American Legion go and walk you through that process, because I've had multiple surgeries, reconstruction. Special forces, kind of rough lifestyle, so 2 reconstructive ankle surgeries, 2 reconstructive shoulder surgeries. And you think, okay, hey, and in terms of disability, you have no idea what's rated as what. So they'll say, okay, from head to toe, what are all the things that are wrong with you? And I won't go into all the details, but it's worth having somebody that understands the process, walk you through that. So that was, one. So VA care, that's been good. And I've got TRICARE after that, as a retiree, which is nice. God, I'm, just trying to think, VA loan, so I bought a house, I still have it, rent it. It's nice. You pay, I think it's PMI. I think it's like, mortgage insurance. So you're going to pay a little bit there, but no money down. So that's great. And the government backs that. So as a young homeowner, somebody that maybe doesn't have, a lot of money to put down, that's a great benefit as well. Now, I've not availed myself of it, but Voc Rehab, I think, is another benefit, for our, guys and gals out there. And what that does is that's money and funding to help like re-educate you if you've got a skill or a trade. So, that is something I'd look at. Obviously, GI Bill, as an academy grad, I went to West Point, so I didn't have to pay that money back. It was kind of I'll say the price of doing business is 5 years. They ended up getting 22 years. Than that. So hey, they got more. They got more than their investment. I hope it did well, for them, for the Army. No, but so my GI Bill, I've got 2 kids. I'll be able to roll that over to my kids. So that's another thing, which is nice. Now, bottom line is, hey man, you do a lot for the big green machine for Army and DOD, but there's some people that maybe they didn't have a good Army experience, and they like to vilify the Army. I very much enjoyed my Army time. Hey, it's good and the bad. Nothing's ever perfect. I gave my best years to the Army. But I feel they did right by me, and I think the Army, does its level best to take care of its people because they've invested in you, and you're giving, your best to the Army. So there's that, quid pro quo. No, so those are the things that I'm aware of in terms of, benefits and all that stuff. There's Boots to Business. There's a multitude of organizations in transition that I help kind of get you up to speed. I've done that. There's a program not really necessarily affiliated with the military, the Kaufman Fast Track program, but they came in when I did SIFL TAP, and that was a 10-day or 10-week primer on entrepreneurship. And I think that's kind of specific to Kansas City area because Ewing Kaufman is a very notable
Yeah.
entrepreneur,
Yep.
in this area. But
Yeah.
that fast track program was great. So for those that want to start a business, develop a business plan, that's something else.
And what
And
was the name of that one? Because
that one was Kaufman Fast Track.
Kaufman Fast Track. Yeah, I don't think we've heard of that one yet. That
no.
sounds interesting.
No, it was good. And I got it for free. Did it out of, like I said, Soldier for Life transition assistance. And yeah, I don't know if that was a one-off. I know they'd run it a couple of times. I don't know if they've
kept it up.
If they've kept it up, if they've sunsetted that, but that's just something to look into. Boots to Business, I know, is another one, and I got some of that as well. Yeah.
All right.
Those are the big ones for my optic. I'm trying to think of anything else.
I mean, those are all good. And then, of course, if listeners didn't listen to our previous episode, we talk about where Mike works at Warrior Sense. So another good benefit to take advantage of.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, no, just very quickly. So of course, there's my organization, Warriors Ascent, warriorsascent.org, but you've got, the VFW. We've got a good relationship with them. I know a few people over there. So Veterans of Foreign Wars, and I know they're really trying to appeal to, a lot of the younger veterans. They're very much aware that, hey, we need to get past this mystique of, the bellying up to the smoke-filled bar and how that no longer appeals to people. So the VFW is working hard to really say, all right, no, we need to remain viable to this younger generation of veterans. So you don't discount them as like a quaint and anachronism of a bygone era, the World War II veterans and stuff like that. They're a good organization that advocates for veterans and veterans causes, and they very much are trying to appeal to, I'll say this, younger generation of veterans. So American Legion's another one, so they're a good organization as well. Disabled American Veterans. Bottom line is there's a multitude of veteran service organizations out there that you can avail yourselves of.
Amazing.
Excellent.
And I'm pretty excited to hear your answer on this one. So what soft skills did you learn from the military that helped you in this path or in your journey?
Man, there are a ton. The management, leadership, and I don't want to be like, oh, awesome leader, this and that. No, but when you've got to manage and lead people at all levels, from platoon leader up to, task force commander or whatever it might be, yeah, you need a certain degree of leadership. There's direct line leadership, your platoon leader stuff. When I was an ODA commander, even though it's, hey, special forces, it's 12 dudes, so it's still kind of, front line stuff. Then, you get a little bit higher and it becomes more organizational level leadership, meaning it's really policies and procedures. You're putting stuff in place. I was an operational level planner at SOCPAC, which is Special Operations Command Pacific. So writing O plans and con plans, and you're writing that knowing that, man, you're going to be putting people into action, men, weapons, and equipment, as they say, OAA, operations, actions, and activities. So while I'll never see those dudes, but the stuff that I'm writing, they're going to go execute this.
Yeah, that's heavy.
There it is.
Wow.
So that's kind of, interesting to think about. Obviously, guys, communication, both written and oral, so very important, and that comes shining through, with plans, written correspondence, planning. Geez, Army, big time, planning, and people kind of poo-poo that sometimes, like, oh, you Army and your plans and your and I've had people say that to me, like, and Department of State, and I've done some tours in embassies. So I've worked with country teams, and they're all great Americans doing great things, and, there's that DOD, Department of State, like, hey, there's an article that was written, DOD is from Mars and DOS is from Venus, right? No, but, I'll say this. I mean, great Americans, doing great work, all of that, so I'm not in all like, oh, our State Department people, they're great people, very smart, you know, I mean, speaking for America, but culturally, I'll say this kind of, different makeup, So I remember one, and I love this lady, but she was just, I was like, well, ma'am, here's my plan. She's like, oh, you military guys with your charts and your graphs and your maps and this and your that. And there was part of me, I wanted to go, well, those charts and those graphs and those maps are why we can overthrow countries in about 100 hours.
Yeah, exactly. That's funny.
So we're not perfect. We're not a perfect organization, DOD
No.
or the Army in specific, but we're the oldest, largest, and most successful organization in American history, so they say. And there's a reason for that. Not to be, egotistical, like, oh, the Army is the greatest thing ever, and every one of us are so awesome. That's not always the case. But clearly there's some best practices that we've adopted, in our long and distinguished lineage and history that are worth emulating, at least in, to a degree, and planning being one of them. And I'm a big Eisenhower fan, another West Pointer, and a Kansan too.
Yeah.
But he'll say his quote, and I'm paraphrasing, but the plan is nothing. Planning is everything.
Yeah.
And it gets back to, disciplining the mind of the commander, as they say. So yeah, they always say, the plan, goes out the window at first contact. No plan survives first contact. Yeah, okay, we get it. But what does that mean? You don't come to the table with a plan? No, of course not. You deviate from the plan. But so that's another skill, is the ability to plan and project and have objectives and lines of effort and intermediate objectives, task and purpose, all of that, things that military people take somewhat for granted, but are poof, like a big epiphany for some, that maybe aren't steeped in a planning tradition.
Yeah. I think it's easy to take, especially for the junior enlisted. It's easy to take it for granted because you're not doing it and you're just receiving the mission and then you're executing your tasks. But the planning, like when I became an NCO, and like right now, I help plan an entire lane for next weekend, basically. And it's like, so some of the shows, and I was the same way. You just don't realize what goes into it. But then it's also weird when it's you now. Like you're like, they're asking like, what do you think? What do you think we should do? Or I'm in a position where I have a little more expertise in a couple of the things we're managing. So I am like kind of I'm basically the SME. I hate referring to myself that way, but in terms of experience, I am the SME and I have to just be confident and give my thoughts and help plan. And it's weird. I totally hear you on people taking it for granted and not until you're in the situation, you kind of do.
Well, no, dude. I mean, that there's so much there to talk about. That's the thing. It's, hey, to be a good leader, I think you need to be a good follower. And you have to have come up that way. Like, all right, hey man, I got to listen to, I got to support this person. And I mean, we've all seen dudes that are not in leadership positions that have not been, and they're like, why are you doing this? I don't understand that. Well, this is stupid. And then all of a sudden you're like, oh, you're in charge. And all of a sudden, then they get that look on their face like,
yeah.
And then guess what? They're doing the same thing. They're like, and then they go, now I understand. And you're like, yeah. It's hard being in the hot seat, isn't it? When everyone's second guessing every move you're making. Right. That's a hard place to be sometimes. And the only thing you can do is just make the best, most informed decision. And then I'll say, solicit input where it's warranted. That's the other thing. I mean, everything from lower level unit stuff to joint planning groups where you're trying to, there comes a time, and this has been my experience. I've always tried to say, all right, here's my going in proposition. I'll say all the time, I'll always come to the table with a plan. I mean, if I'm in charge, I'll be like, all right, I'll have a plan. If everyone sits around and goes, I don't know what to do, I'm like, then here's what we're doing. But best case is, here's my going in proposition, but I want to solicit input.
Yeah, totally.
And that way you get best of breed, and you're like, and ultimately it's incumbent upon you to make that decision as the guy in charge. But you'd be wise and prudent to say, let me seek the wise counsel of people that have either different experience, or in some cases more experience in a particular area.
Yeah.
But then there's paralysis by analysis. Then there's I think this, and you got to be able to go, okay, fine, this is what we're doing. And that takes some courage, because then not everyone is going to get their course of action adopted. Not everyone is going to have their input acted upon. And you got to be good with that, and there's
Yeah.
some people that will be pissed and you're just like, yeah, I got it, man, but I got to move out and
That's
make a decision.
probably one of the most paralyzing like decisions that I see people try to make, or not wanting to make the decision because they have all these options. They don't want to be the person that puts the axe on this idea and then they accept this other idea. And I've been in that position. And it's because I was with people who are immature and couldn't move on versus being in a group of people where it's like, okay, that guy's in charge for whatever reason. He deemed this idea the best, this one not. Let's all help him execute the plan. Instead, it's like, yeah, people get upset or they think whatever. And then, so I've seen people just not make decisions during times when we needed a decision 10 minutes ago. And it's just more and more not decision making because they're afraid to make the decision. And I get that, but
Get caught up in the what ifs.
yeah, exactly. You also touched on communication, and that's a huge one. And I try to teach that to my soldiers and my children as well. But it's what people don't understand about communication is, and hopefully other people like you've learned it from the military, but communication is just communicating what's going on. And if you're good at it, you can decide an outcome more often than not because you can make people see a certain point of view. And of course, I'm talking about manipulating people. I'm talking about someone might not know something and your input is important. But if you speak, rudely or you're cussing at a colonel and they're just hearing the F word and they're not hearing the important thing you have to say, you got to be good at communication, or maybe you're just not good at articulating and you need to practice it. And you said everything clean and concise, but you didn't say it in a way he could understand. That's just where you can get so much done with communication. And I tell my Joes, like, if we make a decision, you don't like it, don't just say you don't like it. Give us a reason. Communicate your issue. Maybe it'll make sense to me and I'll change my mind. I do the same thing with my kids. Like, if you don't like it, explain to me. I'll hear you out. I might still say no, but I might say yes. So yeah, you hit on that. And that's one I think that goes underlooked as far as an important skill, but also one that people get from the military. And we have this soft skill question because even if you're a pipe hitter infantry guy, people say, well, I was an infantry, so I don't really have any relatable skills. Well, it's like, well, you do. You just don't realize it. So like communication, like you said, and planning is being a big one. I mean, corporate America uses both those things constantly on a day-to-day basis.
No, that's true. Persuasion.
Yeah.
So communication, approximately equal to persuasion. And you were saying manipulation. I see what you're getting at. It's really, I'm going to persuade you to see things my way and adopt my course of action, or to say, yeah, hey, I like that idea. Let's go with that.
Yeah.
And what you were talking about, and if you look at argumentation, there's, logic and rhetoric, right? So the logic is an unassailable argument. Okay, here's fact A, fact B, fact C. This all leads to this. This is why this course of action makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
Then there's the rhetoric piece, which is, okay, the prose, I'm going to convince you. I think I'll say roughly touching upon your delivery, like how it's delivered.
Totally.
And you can have an unassailable argument. And then if you're like you said to a colonel, hey, this is the best mother effing plan ever, right? Right, bro? He's going to go, what did you just say? And when I was at the School of Advanced Military Studies, and for those, I don't know if you guys know what that is, but that's I'll say one of the Army's premier planning schools. So, what they'll say is, it's that netherworld, the operational level. You got 3 levels of war. I don't know if you know, right? Strategic, operational, and tactical. So tactical is obviously, hey, on the ground, hey, boom, 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 shooting, fighting, holding terrain. Strategic is the big hand waves. We're going to do this. We're going to invade this. But that netherworld in between operations, actions, and activities, like what that looks like operationally, that's that. So the School of Advanced Military Studies, that's where they train, operational level planners to write campaign plans, stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
Sam's seminar leader, that was one of the first things he said. And I'm a cursor. I mean, I will throw F-bombs like you wouldn't believe.
Hell yeah.
But, I also know how to tailor it to my audience. So if I'm with certain people, I really try to, mitigate that, but if I'm with, you guys, I'll be like, yeah, hey, I'm not going to do it on your podcast because I don't know where this is going to
You can't
end.
actually. It's either explicit or it's not. So we had to go with
Yeah, we
explicit.
went
So
with
you can say
explicit.
fuck all you want.
Easier
Yeah.
enough. Well, hey, I don't want somebody to think I'm a heathenist wretch, but
Fair enough.
no, but what Colonel Inch told me, and I'd remembered, he's like, just be careful. And he wasn't at all one of these like, oh, no, don't offend my. He was
Right.
just saying, listen, be careful about throwing F-bombs and cursing and this and that, because for some people, they find it highly offensive. Some people don't care. But for those that find it, they're not going to hear your message. They're not going to hear your argument. All they're going to hear is the fact that you are throwing all these expletives, and they're going to tune the rest out. So again, there's the logic, and I'm not going to say that's rhetoric per se, but rhetoric in terms of, delivery and
Totally.
flowery language and the way you're able to emote and tap into that affective domain. In other words, how it's delivered, versus, what's delivered to the message. That's the other, I'll say, subtlety, is knowing your audience, communicating it effectively, and in a way in which it's going to be better received, so that then they hear your argument and they go, yeah, that makes sense. That's, I'm not going to say the art of communication, but those are some of the things that I've run into.
Yeah, totally.
And I've got, and I'll say on the outside where not that I've gone wrong per se, but where I have erred is thinking that if my argument is ironclad, it's going to speak for itself. No. You see that in marketing, and this is a little bit of a digression. So I spoke to you about, hey, I've got data, I've got a study, I've got this, I've got that. Some people care about that. I'll say the bean counters or data analytics, like me, that I'm like, yeah, show me that. But what I've come to realize is you need people that on an emotional level will say, this program saved me. That's what I'll roughly equate to, the rhetorical, where somebody's like, this program say that oomph pulls people in.
Yeah.
And then the cherry on top is, and here's data and science that corroborate scientifically and with evidence everything that this guy or gal is telling you.
Yeah.
That's, again, communication.
Yeah.
And I will say the learning thing, for the military people out there, that's very important. I like to say the example that I'll use is if I ever briefed a general a course of action and laid out a decision matrix using the military decision-making process, which I assume you guys are somewhat familiar with.
We are.
And I laid out that, and he said, why, Lieutenant Colonel Kenny, should we go with course of action? And if I said, sir, I feel it in my heart. I laugh and said, I wouldn't have a job. He'd be, get out.
Fortune favors the bold.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm not going to say I'm going to lay out with a level of mathematical certainty, but you're familiar with decision matrix where you've got weighted criteria,
totally,
and assign numerical values to it, and that's all just to kind of say, all right. But if you couldn't lay out a compelling argument, again, logically as to why, sir, accounting for these following, decision criteria, this is why, this versus, sir, I just feel it. And I always used to laugh and go, nobody cares about your feeling. Just give me the data. But on the outside, people do. I say outside of DOD, not that, again.
Yeah.
In the Department of Defense, that nobody cares about you. It's certainly not the case. I mean, it's a human endeavor, and you have to account for that. But when you're trying to sell something, course of action, that emotional aspect is much more important on the outside. That's what I've run into.
Yeah, I can see that for sure. Definitely. And then when you have both, if someone can learn how to present both, then they really have it cornered. And that's where you step. Yeah. And to me, that's the dividing line of you can present your case, but then in the end, you just got to be good with whatever decision. But all right. So this, I got to ask you my favorite question. This is, I probably think Nick's favorite question too, right? Is if you could go back in time, the day you joined, what advice would you give yourself?
I'd say more personal relationships. And here's what I mean by that. When I was younger, I was always very sensitive to what I perceived as, maybe dirty nepotism. Like, in other words, hey, being friendly to like a senior, or just saying, hey, striking up. It's just like, just be professional. They don't care. Just do your job. Be really good. The whole Cal Newport's so good they can't ignore you. And I kind of subscribe to that, and I did well like that, for quite some time. Like, hey, you're just results. They speak for themselves, and man, if you get results and you're good, people will notice you and you be recognized, and that works up to a point. But then after a while, it becomes self-limiting, and that's not saying to not be good, just be like an ingratiator, bootlicker. I'd never say that. But what I'm saying is, if you don't cultivate relationships, to where, hey, I'm a good guy, and I kind of want you to know I'm a good guy, and I'm going to showcase that I'm a good guy, and I'm somebody worthy of being advocated for and taken care of, you're missing the boat. Because if you think everyone's going to see all the great work you're doing, some may not. And I'll just say, on the outside, getting to that conversation that you were having before, you get on the outside, you think everyone really understands all the stuff that you've done? Nobody knows.
Yeah.
You now have to establish a network, and you have to have somebody advocating for you and saying, hey, this is a good person. So now 7 years, Warriors Ascent as an example. Man, we do great stuff. I've got data. I've got, testimonials, all of that. And I'll say the opportunities that I've been afforded, which and we're not by any stretch a big organization, multi-million-dollar, no, not even close. But we get people from all over the country. We get people from Alaska, Maine. We ask, how'd you hear of it? Word of mouth, word of mouth, word of mouth. A lot of the breaks we got are, relationships, doing good things for good people, and really working on cultivating those relationships. So, in sum, not to belabor that, I really, for the longest time, discounted the value of that. I had my close-knit group of people, my special forces guys, my ODA, and it's like, hey, it's us against everyone. We're good, and you realize that without relationships, not in an ingratiating, exploitative manner, like, oh, I'm going to use this person, but just having sponsors, mentors. You'll notice a lot of people that really have ascended in the Army. Not that I have any regrets, but they were an aide to a general, and they did a good job. And that general's like, hey, this is my aide. He or she is a sharp guy or gal, and I'm going to make sure that they get the recognition. Boom. And the other dudes that just slave away in the trenches, or the planning cells, hey, they do good work, but it goes unnoticed, or there are no advocates because they don't have that relationship, that person. And I'll translate it into the nonprofit world as an example, just quickly, and then I'll shut up. I can send a grant or a proposal. I can lay out all this great stuff. And if it goes into the blind, if there's not somebody on the back end waiting to receive and say, hey, Warriors Ascent, they're a great organization. We need to give a look. And I'm not saying preference, but hey, you need to give a good look to this proposal because I know these guys and they're good. If you don't have that, that's a friggin' uphill battle, man. You have no one pulling for you. It's a street fight. So those relationships and cultivating and developing a network, both in the Army and outside of the Army, is super critical. Pay attention to that.
No, that's great advice. One of the I think one of the best we've gotten.
That's definitely a good one.
And kind of going off of that, what were your biggest challenges that you faced, and then how did you overcome them?
In the military,
in the Army, getting out.
Yeah, in the military. Yeah,
in the military.
And if your transition was tough too, that's part of it.
Yeah,
for sure. Transition's a big piece of the military life.
Sure. I mean, armies, schools are tough. Going overseas, it's just being adequately prepared. I mean, for all of it, it's a mental game. It's a physical preparation game. Some of it is you're like, hey, am I good enough? Can I pass muster? And then just training, doing all your stuff. Yeah, I mean, there are a multitude of hard things. I'm not going to enumerate about a bazillion different things, but yeah, it's just having the mental fortitude and toughness to, say, yeah, I can do this, I can achieve this, and then having a training plan, that gets you there. I saw lots of guys, SFAS, talking a bunch of smack. I'm going to do this and I'm going to do that. And They didn't pass the 5 mile run, and you're scratching your head going, were you serious about this?
Yeah.
I mean, holy cow. Like it's a big surprise. They're going to expect you to run 5 miles. Big surprise, at a certain standard, but you see that, so know what you're getting into and be adequately prepared. That's the thing, believe in yourself, but at the same time, don't fool yourself. Believe in yourself, but you've got to, all right, hey, I've passed the wickets. I've done the right things. I know what it is that I can do versus, man, I hope it's easier than I'm thinking it's going to be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sometimes I think I see that. Getting out, transition. It's the organizational culture thing. I see it at Warriors Ascent. I experienced it myself. Is you think there's so many things you take for granted. And again, I mean, I really enjoyed the Army. I'm never going to go, oh man, the Army's crazy. Perfect organization. Yeah, hey, every organization has its issues. But what the Army's really good about, in terms of operating force and generating force, right? So the generating force, your basic training, all your training institutions that provide you trained and ready forces. And then you get that at the unit, and you get a dude or whomever comes to you and you're like, all right, you've been from the schoolhouse. I know you've passed muster, and you give them unit specific and, they're maybe not quite up to par. You got to send them down range a little bit, but then you're like, all right, but you've got a guy, in my case, I worked with guys, that are ready. They're ready. They're good quality people, not 99% of the time. And they're there for the right reasons because they wouldn't put themselves through the ringer to do all that stuff, if they weren't in it for the right reasons. Again, 99% of the time. Then you get out in the civilian world and you think, hey, man, everyone's wired that way. No.
Yeah.
No, it is not. And there's some great people. Don't get me wrong. I'm never going to overgeneralize. But you think everyone's doing things for the right reasons. Not even close.
Yeah.
The sense of entitlement. I could go on and on and on.
Mm-hmm.
Self-serving, just conniving, manipulative. You're just like, and then you're being very clear. Hey, listen, this is what I'm feeling. This is what I'm perceiving. I don't let, and oh, no. And then right behind, and you're like, stuff that in the Army, you'd get the crap kicked out of you for.
Oh, yeah.
But out here, it's like, yeah, that's the stuff that I just can't stand.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
One of my pet peeves in and out of the service is people who screw over others because you can achieve so much as a team. Like selfish people don't even realize they could get so much more than they get by being selfish, by being a team player. They can have so much more and they don't understand that. And it just, well, one, it means I can't trust you. But yeah, absolutely. Just,
yeah. No, I mean, there are good people all over the place. That's the refreshing thing. In the Army, clearly it's not the case that the Army's just filled with nothing but great and virtuous people. That's not it either. But again, especially with the elite units, the higher you go, the selection rate becomes less and less, and what you're left with are really mostly high quality people. And it's just the culture thing. I mean, aside from people's individual virtues or motives or nefarious intent or whatever it might be, you just think, well, we all value sacrifice, commitment, selfless service and diligence and this and that, and you come to realize it was one of the courses at Sam's, one of the blocks of instruction talked about value assumptions and value prioritization, and that hit home for me. It's like everyone talks about values. Do you value this? Oh, of course I do. You value fairness? Oh yeah. Do you value hard work? Oh yeah. Do you value? Oh yeah. Everyone says they value, and then but where the nut cutting time comes is like, what do you value more? Do you value diligence or fairness? Do you value this or that? And that's where you start seeing, oh, do you value work ethic or friendliness? Those kind of things. And then all of a sudden you're like, you don't value things the same. Wow. So if Joe Blow is busting his ass, but this person is not, but they're really friendly. What do you value more, friendliness or diligence? Because guess what? When the going gets tough, he can be friendly, but this guy gets the job done.
There was an
Yeah.
interesting thing I read, kind of going off that. Again, in college, interested in the military, I read Rogue Warrior by Richard Marcinko.
Mhm.
And I don't know if you read that book. Did
Oh
you?
yeah. No,
So,
I'm familiar with it. Yeah, Demo Dick, SEAL Team
yep,
6.
yep. Actually, side story, I don't have to get into it. I got to meet him at one point. That's awesome. He signed a shot glass. It's at my house. I love it. Anyway, the point of the story, though, one of the things that stuck from that book the most with me to this day, and it actually relates to outside the military stuff just as much as the military, is when for those of you who don't know, he started SEAL Team 6. He was the first commander, and he handpicked his people from SEAL Teams 1 and 2. And one of the things he would do as guys was going through buds was he did not pick the people that looked at home because he didn't see them in distress. So he didn't know how they would act in distress. He picked the people that were hating life, but they were pushing through it anyway. Those were the people he wanted in SEAL Team 6. So that was always an interesting thing to me of like, just because someone looks comfy or whatever, it's like, what do you value more? Well, this guy is demonstrating that he's going to push through, even though it sucks and he hates it, but he's going to do it anyway. So I value his demonstration of his drive to get through that.
Yeah. No, that makes sense.
But yeah, now we normally open with this, but just how things shook out, we'll close with it. Can you give us a funny story?
I can.
Figured you'd have a few.
Because again, you prepped me adequately. I appreciate you with some questions. So I was like, do I have funny stories? I'm not a funny guy. No.
You made us laugh. You're
Oh,
funny.
Yeah, well, no, I am kind of funny my own little way. I try to be. No, when I was a detachment commander, we had a guy, I won't, go into too many names, but he came from behind the fence to be the group sergeant major, hyper competitive dude, very, very, and some of the other guys that were in that unit are like, oh, Jody, yeah, hey, great dude. So he was like, I want to have a like best special, best detachment competition, like best ranger. So he brought that to First Special Forces Group, and then they had it at USASOC. So my battalion commander was like, hey, we need to put in a team. We were off cycle, so we're like, heck, we'll do it. We'll do it. We'll train for it. So we won. So we won the first inaugural First Special Forces Group best team competition. I'm like, hey, how awesome is that? So we go over to USASOC, right? U.S. Army Special Operations Command at Fort Bragg, to do their competition. So they're, telling us what it's going to be, this and that. And I won't go into too many details, but one of them was I'll say a non-standard drop zone. I mean, for those that are airborne that have been on Bragg, they've got, Vagel, they've got all the, the standard drop zones. Well, this one ended up being like a farm up in like North Carolina somewhere. And it was at night, all of that. And it was supposed to notionalize like a partisan link up, like unconventional warfare style and all that. And I remember getting that jump master brief. And usually you're just kind of like, yeah, I've done this a million times. But this one, it's like, no, I need to know this nonsense. So he's like, here's the track of the aircraft. Here's this, here's that, here's the, and then he says something about, well, hey, it's a farm. It's like, cow pastures. And I'm like, all right, I'll log that away. I'm like, yeah, not important, superfluous, but okay, I'll bear it in mind. So we jump out over this thing, and I never had a tree jump at 80 something jumps, jumped out of, airplanes, hot air balloons at, the 707 compound in Korea, so we go and we do this in Phil. It's night, and part of it was, jump master stuff. One of my guys was jump master, and where, okay, hey, we're and quick assembly. I mean, what they were exercising is that we could link up and assemble and then effect link up with, a partisan link up. That's what they're notionalizing in an unfamiliar drop. I mean, it's good exercise, again, non-standard drop zone. So we jump out, my guy, he puts us out. And I mean, I'd had some close jumps, in terms of, bringing my knees up to my chest to, just barely miss the tops of trees. But this one I came out and it's like, it's all I'm seeing is trees. So I'm like, crap, there's no way I'm going to be able to, because I'm looking for a drop zone and I can't find it. Right. I'm like, geez, man. So I'm looking around, and I'm like, I'm gonna have my first friggin' tree jump. I hope this isn't ugly, you know.
Mhm.
And I go all the way through, and I'm thinking, oh, and my chute gets hung up, and it's the softest landing I ever had. You know, I'm literally like 3 inches off the ground. I'm like, oh my God, thank goodness. I'm thinking I'm going to break an arm. I'm going to something. Pull my chute out of the, yeah, everything goes perfect. I, put my stuff in, but now I'm in the middle of the woods, pitch dark. I can't see shit. So then I hear, it's one of my guys, and he's like, sir. I'm like, man, it's my like 18 Charlie. So he's a demo sergeant, right? It's my junior 18 Charlie. So E6. And he's like, sir, where? I'm like, Matt, come here. He's like, so where the fuck are we? Like, man, I don't know. Like, I don't even know which direction to turn. I mean, I'm kind of like, okay. So, I'm sitting there like, oh man, what are you doing? And I hear, moo, moo. And I was like, that's where we're going. So that was it. I'm like, so we get out there, we follow the sound of this friggin' cow. We get out into the pasture. We linked up with our guys, lickety split, and we were on our way. But I'm thinking to myself, it's just like, I remember them saying cow pasture. That's and I'm like, all right. And I'm like, well, I guess we're going that way, man.
That was good foreshadowing.
Okay, and then related to that, here's another little bit of funny,
yeah.
The jackass captain team leader. So I'm like, all right, we got to do this link up. And there's this fence, right? There's this fence. And I was like, all right, we got to get over this fence so we can link up. You know where I'm going, right? So I come up and I'm like, all right, guys, hey.
Yeah.
I was like, what? They're like, what the fuck happened? I'm like, don't touch that fence, man. Don't touch that fence. It's an electric fence. So we ended up like propping our rifles up or doing whatever. But that was like the shock of a lifetime. I'm like, all right, guys, I'm going to lift this fence up. And yeah. So that started our 3-day exercise in the woods. So as the story goes, so that was our 3-day, best team exercise in the woods where we did all sorts of stuff. But the more somber aspects are, 2 days into it, we're going through Pisgah National Forest. We went from that to Pisgah, so it's all rough mountain type stuff. It was kind of up there. And then we're going from site to site, and then they hold us up. Then we did like a 1-rope bridge, that kind of stuff, Ranger-esque type stuff, negotiating water obstacle. And they hold us up. And we're like, what's going on, man? Let's get to our next. So they're like, no, hold on, sir. It's like a POSX. And we're like, what's going on? And, they finally like, all right, they're waiting for instructions. They're like, we're like, what was the holdup? And they said, a plane just flew into one of the Twin Towers.
Oh.
And we were like, what? They're like, yeah. And they're like, here's your next point. And we were like, oh, this is some like mindfuck shit. We're like, oh, okay. So we did a long land navigation to our next spot, and it was like, put a mortar into action, that type of stuff. So kind of like military stakes, if you've ever done those types of things, different skills. So we get there, and we do our thing. We did again like multi-kilometer, hour thing. We get there, we pass the skill, and take a break. All right, here's your next point. And I remember saying to the NCO, I was like, hey. It's like, no bullshitting aside, man. Like, what happened? Did a plane? He's like, sir, 2 planes hit both towers. They both collapsed. And we're like, holy shit. And then we just went back through our stuff. We didn't see it until we got back into town after the whole thing was over. Gosh. And, we're watching the stuff come down, and, it was like an Outback or something. It was a restaurant, because we were eating, army food, and we're watching the tower come down, and people were looking at us going, where have you been? We're like, the fucking woods, man. We haven't seen this.
God.
Yeah. Holy shit.
So
that's wild. Yeah. Everyone remembers where they were.
Yeah.
Which is crazy because when we were in Afghanistan, we had guys that were born after it, which is wild, but to those of us who, were old enough, we could remember. Everybody remembers. Gosh. Mike, it's been awesome having you on.
Thank you so much.
For sure.
It's been a pleasure to meet you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, likewise, fellas. Appreciate you. Appreciate what you guys do.
We thank you for listening, and we hope you got something helpful out of this.
Right now, the best way to support us is to simply spread the word. If you know a fellow veteran who could use some resources to elevate their life, send them our way.
Until next time, remember to check your 0s, 5s, 10s, and 25s.